In 2019, scientists tested the shoe insoles of a man who had been dead for 5,000 years. His insoles outperformed modern hiking boots. Not matched. Outperformed. The man had no factory, no synthetic material, no knowledge of thermal physics as a discipline. He packed grass into a leather boot, chose the right species of grass, packed it at the right density, and produced something the modern outdoor industry has not beaten. His name was Ötzi. And the genuinely unsettling part is this. He was not an expert. He was an ordinary person. Which means that somewhere between his world and ours, something was lost. This video is about what that thing was. The story most people carry about prehistoric humans in winter is wrong. Completely wrong. It goes, they shivered, they suffered, they barely survived, they died young. That story is not history. It is condescension. The archaeological record of cold climate survival does not show helpless creatures clinging to fire. It shows engineering. It shows chemistry. It shows communities that had cracked the problem of cold so thoroughly that they colonized every frozen environment on Earth, from Siberia to the Arctic to the peaks of the Alps, long before a single city existed anywhere. They were not surviving winter. They had mastered it. The question is how. Start with the body itself. When geneticists study populations whose ancestors spent thousands of generations in cold northern climates, they find something written directly into the DNA. A variant of a protein called uncoupling protein 1, which controls how the body burns fat to produce heat rather than store it, appears at significantly higher rates in cold climate lineages. Cold winters did not just change what humans wore or built. They rewired human metabolism. The people who generated heat slightly better survived. Their children inherited the advantage. The cold ran a selection experiment on the human species for thousands of generations, and the result is still inside you if your ancestors came from the north. But genetics was the slow lane. The fast lane was something else entirely. 60,000 years ago, someone picked up a sharpened piece of bone and did something no other animal had ever done. They sewed. Not poked, not tied. Sewed. Fitting two pieces of hide together so precisely that warm air stayed trapped against the skin. That single act, repeated and refined across generations, became the foundation of cold weather survival. Bone needles from this era have been found across Eurasia. What they prove is that ancient humans understood insulation physics before physics had a name. A draped hide and a fitted garment are not the same thing. Ancient humans knew this. Then they went further. They waterproofed. Animal brain rubbed into hide, a process called brain tanning, chemically restructures the leather into something soft, flexible, and highly water-resistant. Animal fat rubbed directly onto skin created a lipid barrier against moisture and wind. The same principle used by modern channel swimmers. Arrived at independently, thousands of years earlier, by people who never wrote it down. And for shelter, they did something that should have been impossible. At sites across Ukraine and Russia, archaeologists have found homes built entirely from mammoth bones and tusks. Bones as columns. Tusks arched overhead. Hides stretched across the frame. Grass and moss packed inside for insulation. These were not improvised. These were engineered structures, built for winter, in landscapes with no caves and no trees. The peoples who pushed furthest into the Arctic solved the shelter problem with the most counterintuitive material imaginable. Snow. The igloo is not a primitive hut. It has been studied by physics departments at major universities. The dome geometry distributes weight so the structure cannot collapse. Snow insulates because of air trapped between its crystals. The entrance tunnel angles below floor level, so cold air, which is denser than warm, physically cannot enter. One small seal-fat lamp raises the interior from -40 outside to above freezing inside. Modern engineers have tested this. It works better than it has any right to. But that is not the strangest part. Some researchers now believe that the most extreme cold climate populations did something that no mainstream history textbook will say directly. They believe those populations deliberately entered a state close to torpor. Not sleep. Torpor. Ethnographic records from multiple Arctic groups describe communities lying together in enclosed shelters for weeks during deep winter, barely moving, eating almost nothing. And the biology supports it. Under severe cold and calorie restriction, the human body does lower its metabolic rate, heart rate drops. Core temperature falls slightly. Energy burn decreases. In a world where stored calories were the difference between spring and death, the body that burns the least survives. This was not weakness. This was a controlled biological strategy. 30,000 years ago at Sungir in Russia, archaeologists found 2 children buried head to head. Covering them were more than 10,000 individually carved ivory beads, each sewn onto clothing that had long since rotted away. The bead positions reconstructed the garments exactly. Fitted trousers, fitted jacket, hood, boots, full layered cold weather coverage. For children, the community had invested what researchers estimate as thousands of hours of labor into the winter gear of its youngest members. Because a child who loses too much heat in a cold environment does not get sick first, they die first. At Ohalo 2 in Israel, 23,000 years ago, during a climate significantly colder than today, archaeologists found plant remains from over 140 species stockpiled in quantities that went far beyond what anyone needed right then. This is a winter pantry. This is planning for a season that had not arrived yet, which requires holding time in your mind in a way we rarely attribute to people this ancient. And Utsi. His medical kit contained a birch polypore fungus with documented antibiotic properties. It contained yarrow, used across dozens of unconnected cultures to fight inflammation and infection. He was carrying a functional pharmaceutical kit, assembled deliberately. In 3300 BC, none of this was clean or painless. Winter in the ancient world was not a season people managed. It was something they endured together or did not endure at all. Hunters went out in conditions that would hospitalize a modern person in hours, because if they came back empty-handed, the community did not eat. The fat stores built over summer would run out. When fat runs out, the body burns muscle. When muscle is gone, it is over, and it happens fast. Children and the elderly were the most vulnerable. Communities knew this. They planned around it. They grieved around it. The rituals that appeared in virtually every cold climate ancient culture, the fires at the darkest point of the year, the communal meals, the stories told in total darkness were not cultural decoration. They were survival infrastructure. 10 people sharing a small enclosed sleeping space generate enough combined body heat to measurably raise the temperature inside. Pressing together was not comfort. It was thermodynamics. And the stories told in the dark served a function as precise as any tool. They kept people from giving up. They reminded a group that was cold and hungry and exhausted that the people before them had survived this, and so would they. Here is the inversion that changes how you see all of this. We assume prehistoric humans were worse at surviving cold than we are because we have better technology. But strip the technology away, and the ancient human wins. Every time. Not because they were stronger. Because they had been paying attention to winter since the day they were born. Taught by people who paid the same attention. Who learned from people who survived by paying it. That chain of inherited attention was the technology. It was tested across more winters than any modern system has been. The indigenous peoples of the Arctic, who still carry traditional cold survival knowledge, outperform trained military personnel in cold weather survival exercises. Not occasionally. Consistently. And that knowledge is disappearing right now. As younger generations move into heated buildings, the techniques that kept ancestors alive for thousands of years go untransmitted because they are no longer needed. Within 2 or 3 generations, knowledge that took 10,000 years to build can be gone. Some of it already is. That chain bent. It did not break. The sleeping bag is a direct descendant of the enclosed fur sleeping robes Arctic peoples used for millennia. The layering system that outdoor brands sell as innovation is what Ötzi was doing 5,000 years ago. The high-fat, high-protein diet, recommended for people in extreme cold matches, the dietary record at cold climate archaeological sites almost exactly. The aspirin in your medicine cabinet is a pharmaceutical descendant of the willow bark preparations ancient peoples used on cold injuries. And the pull you feel in winter toward warmth, toward gathering, toward fire and food, and the people closest to you, that is not sentiment. That is biological memory. Your body carries the instruction that winter is when you need your people. It was written in by every winter your ancestors survived together. We come back to the shoe. One grass-lined insole in a dead man's boot, lying in a glacier for 5,000 years. The scientists who tested it were not expecting what they found. They were expecting to confirm that modern materials had moved beyond this. Instead, they had to recalculate. The grass Ötzi chose, the species, the packing density, the layering, produced insulation that the modern industry has not matched. He did not figure this out. He was taught it. His parents were taught it. Their parents were taught it. The chain runs back far enough that its beginning is lost in a past we cannot see. He carried that chain into the mountains, and it kept him alive until it did not. The cold did not break us. It built us. It selected for our intelligence, shaped our DNA, forced us into communities, pushed us to chemistry and engineering, and ritual and love. And every winter you survive, warm in your house, surrounded by people you chose to be near, you are living on knowledge you did not earn, passed forward by people whose names are gone, who looked at the cold and decided, again and again, that it was not going to win.